Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change, environmental concerns, as well as other things that are also important in the world, but this is the absolute #1 news story and should be on the mainstream news every single day. And I don't know, it just doesn't seem to make it on for whatever reason. Even a Democracy Now! Thing I was watching the other day, it was like the last segment of the show. So I'm sure, they were talking about all kinds of stuff. And then, the last segment was, what do you think about climate change taking out the whole planet? Yeah, looks pretty bad. All right, well, that wraps it up for Democracy Now! I don't know. It's just not very fun, There's no money in it. It's no intrigue other than, we're all going to die really soon. And then, that's just scary. Anyways, thank you all for switching over to the Black Bear News channel, or for continuing to switch over. I've got about 300 subscribers on the new channel. Still quite a few subscribers on the old channel on Red Llama Music. But I am trying to make this move happen, like for real, very quickly. So this will be the last video that I link on Red Llama Music. So if you're not subscribed to Black Bear News, you won't get any updates when I upload a video. So you'll probably be wondering after a few days where my videos went, if you are just subscribed to the Red Llama Music channel. So please, if you haven't already, please come over to the Black Bear News channel. The link is in the description box below this video. Just follow that link over there, subscribe, please, and I will be continuing on with the channel, specifically, primarily and exclusively on Black Bear News. So let's continue to look at the way in which climate change is unfolding. With, I guess, the latest news in the US is that there's a nor'easter going on the East Coast. So I just want to read a little bit about that. Monster nor'easter pummels East Coast, at least 7 dead. This is actually from yesterday. A massive nor'easter pummeling the East Coast is responsible for at least 7 deaths. The storm strengthened rapidly Friday, undergoing what's known as bombogenesis, or bombing out, when a low-pressure system drops 24 millibars in 24 hours. Dubbed a bomb cyclone, the catchphrase was coined earlier this year as a nickname for another nor'easter back in early January. At least 7 people have died in the storm, all killed by falling trees. A 6-year-old boy died in Virginia after a tree fell on his family's home, officials said. Others include an 11-year-old boy hit by a falling tree in New York State, a 57-year-old man in Upper Merion, Pennsylvania, hit by a tree while in his car, and a 77-year-old woman struck by a branch outside her home in Baltimore. Heavy snow fell across much of the interior Northeast Friday afternoon, including in Syracuse and Albany, New York, New Jersey, and eastern Pennsylvania. Sussex County, New Jersey, had already seen 10 inches of snow by the afternoon. New York City saw a mix of rain, snow, sleet, and winds that wrapped up by evening. Over 4 inches of rain fell on eastern Long Island and parts of eastern Massachusetts. Excuse me. Connecticut and Boston were hit with heavy rain, flooding, and whipping winds. Boston especially saw heavy coastal flooding late Friday. So yeah, Boston is one of those cities that's ultra vulnerable to sea level rise. And so they've already had huge storm surges a few times this year. And There's a picture here of coastal storm surge flooding Scituate, Massachusetts. The highest wind gust was 93 miles an hour in Barnstable, Massachusetts, or Barnstable, while an 83-mile-per-hour gust was measured in both East Falmouth, Massachusetts, and Little Compton, Rhode Island. Hurricane force wind gusts will continue through coastal Massachusetts and Rhode Island Friday night. So it looks like most of the damage was yesterday. Lots of high winds remaining in effect, with gusts from 50 to at least 65 mile per hour from the Carolinas to Massachusetts. Over 2.2 million customers were without power across the Northeast early Friday evening, but power was restored to more than 2/3 of those customers by 9:30 p.m., leaving just over 700,000 customers still in the dark. In Pennsylvania, a school bus was toppled over by high winds. No students were on board, and the driver's injuries were minor. In Sweetland, Maryland, 300 people were displaced after an apartment building partially collapsed, according to WUSA. A tractor trailer overturned on the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in New York. And that's it. Oh, story can continue, excuse me. In Washington, D.C., winds reached 71 miles per hour at Dulles Airport, 62 miles per hour at Reagan International, and Prince William County public schools in Washington, D.C. area were closed Friday due to high wind warnings. The federal government also shuttered all of its offices. Travel was at a standstill. 4,000 flights were canceled. Amtrak temporarily suspended service along the Northeast Corridor until Saturday. Coastal flood alerts are in effect from Maryland to Maine, with major and possible record coastal flooding expected in the Boston area Friday night into Saturday. The third highest tide on record happened today at Boston Harbor, reaching 14.67 feet. Do not try to drive through the water, the Duxbury Fire Department in Massachusetts said. I can't stress this enough. This is not a snowstorm, but it's a heck of a storm, and people need to take it seriously, Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker said at a news conference Thursday night. Blizzard warnings were issued for parts of upstate New York, which saw 50-mile-per-hour winds, whiteout conditions, and an additional foot of snow Friday afternoon. Parts of New York, Pennsylvania, and northwest New Jersey were likely to see 1 to 2 feet of snow through Friday evening. All right. So lots of stuff happening mostly yesterday. I didn't see too many updated things for today. Here's another on the other side of the world. Mumbai braces for sweltering Holi as IMD issues heat wave warning for the city surrounding regions. The Indian Meteorological Department on Wednesday issued a warning about a heat wave during the next 48 hours for Mumbai and surrounding districts, said media reports. The IMD in its weather forecast said that the maximum temperature for Mumbai for the next 48 hours will be around 38 degrees Celsius. That's about 100 degrees. The minimum temperature is likely to be around 21 degrees Celsius. For the coastal areas of Mumbai, if the departure in temperature is more than 5 degrees and reported by multiple stations continuously for at least 2 days, it is considered a heat wave. K.S. Hazalakar, Deputy Director General, Western Region IMD, was quoted as saying by the Indian Express. Explaining the heat wave phenomenon, the IMD said that warm and dry easterly winds are causing an increase in temperature in the coastal regions. According to a report in the Times of India, the maximum temperatures in Mumbai, Ratnagiri, and Bira in the Raigad district were around 5 degrees above normal on Wednesday. In Mumbai, the maximum temperature was 37.4 degrees Celsius in Santa Cruz. Weather experts have advised people to avoid stepping out in the afternoon if not required and to stay hydrated. Skymet Weather Services has said that the humidity level in the state capital is also soaring. The IMD's Mumbai office, according to Hindustan Times, said that Thursday's maximum temperature will be 6 degrees above normal, while the mercury is expected to drop marginally on Friday. The maximum temperature will still be above 35 degrees Celsius. So on to some general climate change articles. This is from Truth Out from Thursday, March 1st, by Tom Engelhart. The Ultimate Blowback Universe, a planet boiling with unintended consequences. You want to see blowback in action? That's easy enough. All you need is a vague sense of how Google search works. Then type into it phrases like warmest years, rising sea levels, melting ice, lengthening wildfire season, or future climate refugees. And you'll find yourself immersed in the grimmest of blowback universes. It's a world which should give that CIA term of tradecraft a meaning even the agency never imagined for it. But before I put you on this blowback planet of ours and introduce you to the blowback president presiding over it, I want to take a moment to remember Mr. Blowback himself. And what a guy he was. Here's how he described himself in the last piece he wrote for Tom Dispatch just months before his death in November 2010. My own role these past 20 years has been that of Cassandra, whom the gods gave the gift of foreseeing the future, but also cursed because no one believed her. If you don't already know who they're talking about. I don't know who they're talking about, apparently. He wasn't being immodest. He had, in many ways, seen the shape of things to come for what he never hesitated to call the American Empire, including in that 2010 piece, Its Decline. As he wrote then, 35 years from now, America's official century of being top dog, from 1945 to 2045, will have come to an end. Its time may, in fact, be running out right now. We are likely to begin to look ever more like a giant version of England at the end of its imperial run, as we come face to face with, if not necessarily to terms with, our aging infrastructure, declining international clout, and sagging economy. You know how, if you're of a certain age at least, there are those moments when you go back to the books that truly matter to you, the ones that somehow prepared you as best anyone can be prepared for the years to come. One I return to regularly is his. I'm talking about Blowback, the costs and consequences of American empire. The man who wrote that was Chalmers Johnson, a former CIA consultant and eminent scholar of modern Asian history, who would, in that work, characterize himself in his former life as a spear carrier for the empire. Blowback was published in 2000 to next to no notice. After the attacks of September 11th, 2001, however, it became a bestseller. There was so much to learn from it, starting with the very definition of blowback, a word he brought out of the secret world for the rest of us to consider. The term blowback, which officials of the Central Intelligence Agency first invented for their own internal use, he wrote, refers to the unintended consequences of policies that were kept secret from the American people. What the daily press reports as the malign acts of terrorists or drug lords or rogue states or illegal arms merchants often turn out to be blowback from earlier American operations. Oh, yes, indeed. And if unintended consequences isn't a supremely appropriate title under which to write the misbegotten history of the years that followed 9/11 in the era of the self-proclaimed sole superpower, or as American politicians love to say, the indispensable nation, what is? Of course, in the best blowback fashion, Al-Qaeda's attacks of that day hit this country like literal bolts from the blue. Even the top officials of George W. Bush's administration were stunned as they scurried for cover. Of all Americans, they at least should have been better prepared, given the warning offered to the president only weeks earlier by that blowback center of operations, the CIA. Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S. was the title of the presidential daily brief of August 6, 2001. Osama bin Laden would prove to be the poster boy of blowback. His organization, Al-Qaeda, would be nurtured into existence by an all-American urge to give the Soviet Union its own Vietnam, what its leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, would later call its bleeding wound, and to do so in, of all places, Afghanistan. In October 2001, 12 years after the Red Army limped out of that country in defeat, and a decade after the Soviet Union imploded, in part thanks to that very wound, Washington would launch a global war on terror. It would be the Bush administration's response to Al-Qaeda's supposedly inexplicable attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. The Taliban's Afghanistan would be the first target, and so would begin America's second Afghan war, a conflict now almost 17 years old with no end in sight, because they don't want an end. They don't want an end. If you can't understand the intention of the attack is to create a never-ending fight against terror. If you don't understand that, you're not thinking. Blah, blah, blah. And if you also believe that Osama bin Laden was killed and his body was buried at sea because of tradition, you're dumb. You're an idiot. Because you'll believe anything. Oh, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, that sounds totally. Yeah, they just buried him. They just were like, nah, throw him over the side of the boat. This guy that we've been hunting for years and years and years. Oh, my gosh. Anyways. It would be the Bush administration's response to Al-Qaeda's supposedly inexplicable. Anyways. Yet in our American world, remarkably few connections were ever made between the present war and that blowback moment against the Soviets nearly 40 years ago. Were he alive, Chalmers Johnson, who never ceased to make such connections, would have been grimly amused, giving Imperial overstretch new meaning. Talk about the endless ramifications of blowback. It was bin Laden's genius for a mere $400,000 to $500,000 to goad Washington into spending trillions of dollars across significant parts of the Islamic world, fighting conflict after conflict, all of which only seemed to create yet more rubble, terror outfits, and refugees, who in turn have helped to fuel yet more right-wing populist movements from Europe to Donald Trump's America. Tell me it's not a blowback world. Bin Laden's genius. Bin Laden was a CIA asset. Oh my God. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways, this is like an article based on a false telling of history, kind of. Yes, actually, very much so. In an act of pure wizardry, bin Laden drew out of Bush, Cheney, and their company their deepest geopolitical fantasies about the. So they just took this opportunity, this grand opportunity. Oh. Oh my God. I don't know if I'm going to read much more of this because I can't. I can't. Blah, blah, blah. The greatest fantasies about the ability of that all-powerful country, and in particular, the greatest force for freedom in the history of the world, the U.S. military, to dominate any situation on Earth. The early months of 2003, when they were preparing to invade Saddam Hussein's Iraq, may have been their ultimate hubristic moment in which imagining anything other than success of a historic sort, not just in that country, but far beyond it, was inconceivable. Until then, never, except in Hollywood movies when the bad guy rubbed his hands with glee and cackled that the world was his, had any power truly dreamed of taking it all, of ruling or at least directing the planet itself. Even for a globalizing great power without rivals and wealthy almost beyond compare, that would prove the ultimate in conceptual overstretch. Looking back, it's easy enough to see that almost 17 years of ceaseless war and conflict across the greater Middle East, Africa, and even parts of Asia, of massive destruction, of multiplying failed states, of burgeoning terror outfits, and of blowback of every sort, have given the old phrase, biting off more than you can chew, new geopolitical meaning, and all of that is very, very true. Washington created what was, in effect, a never-ending blowback machine. In those years, while the distant wars went on, and terrors of every imaginable sort grew in this country, the United States was transformed into a remarkable, if not yet fully graspable fashion. In a remarkable, if not yet fully graspable fashion, the national security state now reigns supreme in Washington. I wonder why. Generals or retired generals are perched, however precariously, atop key parts of the civilian government. A right-wing populist who rose to power in part on the fear of immigrants, refugees, and Islamic extremists has his giant golden letters emblazoned on the White House, and a hotel just down Pennsylvania Avenue that no diplomat or lobbyist with any sense would dare not patronize. The police have been militarized, borders have been further fortified, spy drones have been dispatched to American skies, and the surveillance of the citizenry and its communications have been made the order of the day. Meanwhile, right, so this is all because, because of bin Laden's genius. Is this because of bin Laden's genius, or is this because, say the military-industrial complex dreamed all this up so that they could implement all this? How convenient. Meanwhile, the latest disturbed teen armed with military-style AR-15 semi-automatic has just perpetrated another in a growing list of slaughters in American schools. In response, the president, Republican politicians, and the National Rifle Association have all plugged the arming of teachers and administrators, as well as the hardening of schools. Yeah. It seems, in other words, that in setting out to take the world in some surprising fashion, this country both terrorized and conquered itself. For that, Osama bin Laden should certainly be congratulated, but so should George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, and all the other neoconservative pals, not to speak of David Petraeus, James Mattis, John Kelly, H.R. McMaster, and a host of other generals in America's losing wars. Think of it this way: at what looked like the height of American power, Washington managed to give Imperial overstretch a historically new meaning. Even on a planet without other great power rivals, a Pax Americana in the greater Middle East, no less the full-scale garrisoning and policing of significant parts of the rest of the globe proved far too much for the sole superpower. No matter how technologically advanced its military or powerful and transnational its economy, as it turned out, that urge to take everything would prove the perfect launching pad for this country's decline. Someday, if there is such a day, this record will prove a goldmine for historians of imperial power and blowback. And yet all of this, even the fate of this country, should be considered relatively minor matters, given the ultimate blowback to come. Oh, and now they're going to talk about climate change. All right. Just had to get past that fake history of the United States. Humanity nailed to a cross of coal. There was, in fact, another kind of blowback underway, and the American empire was clearly a player in it, too, even a major one, but hardly the only one. Every place using fossil fuels was involved. This form of blowback threatens not just the decline of a single great imperial power, but of humanity itself, of the very environment that nurtured generation after generation of us over these thousands of years. By definition, that makes it the worst form of blowback imaginable. Really? Do you think so? What I have in mind, of course, is climate change or global warming. In a way, you could think of this as a story of another kind of superpower and how it launched the decline of us all. On a planetary scale, the giant corporations and national fuel companies that make up global big energy have long been on the hunt for every imaginable reserve of fossil fuels and for ways to control and exploit them. The oil, natural gas, and coal, such outfits extracted, fueled industrial society, still spreading car cultures and consumerism as we know it. Over most of the years, such companies were powering human development. The men who ran them and their employees had no idea that the greenhouse gases released by the burning of fossil fuels were heating the atmosphere and the planet's waters in potentially disastrous ways. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, however, like scientists elsewhere, those employed by ExxonMobil, the world's largest oil company, had become aware of the phenomenon, as would those of other energy companies. That meant the men who ran Exxon and other major firms recognized it in advance of most of the rest of us just what kind of blowback the long-term burning of oil, natural gas, and coal was going to deliver, a planet ever less fit for human habitation. They just didn't think that those of us in the non-scientific community should know about it, and so by the 1990s, they were already doing their damnedest to hide it from us. However, when scientists not in their employ started to publicize the new reality in a significant way, as the heads of some of the most influential and wealthiest corporations on Earth, they began to invest striking sums in the fostering of a universe of think tanks, lobbyists, and politicians devoted to what became known as climate change denial. Between 1998 and 2014, for instance, Exxon would pump $30 million into just such think tanks and similar groups while donating $1.87 million directly to congressional climate change deniers. It doesn't take a lot of thought to realize that, from its inception, this was the functional definition of the worst crime in history. In the name of record profits and the comfortable life, as well as corporate sustainability in an unending fossil fuelized world, their CEOs had no hesitation about potentially dooming the human future to a hell on earth of rising temperatures, rising sea levels, and ever more extreme weather. They gave, that is, a new all-encompassing meaning to the term genocide. They were prepared, if necessary, to take out the human species. But I suspect even they couldn't have imagined quite how successfully they would be when it came to bringing the sole superpower of the post-9/11 world on board. In a sense, the two leading forms of blowback of the 21st century, the Imperial and fossil fuelized ones, came to be focused in a single figure. After all, it's hard to imagine the rise to power of Donald Trump in a world in which the Bush administration had decided not to invade either Afghanistan or Iraq, but to treat its global war on terror as a localized set of police actions against one international criminal and his scattered group of followers. As it happened, one form of blowback from the disastrous wars that were meant to create the basis for a Pax Americana planet helped to produce the conditions and fears at home that put Donald Trump in the White House. The gift that keeps on giving. Or put another way, in the face of the evidence produced by essentially every knowledgeable scientist on Earth, on a planet already feeling the early and increasingly extreme results of a warming atmosphere, millions of Americans elected a man who claimed it was all a hoax, who was unabashedly dedicated above anything else, except perhaps his big, fat, beautiful wall on the Mexican border, to a fossil fuelized, I don't know why they keep saying fuelized, American planet, and who insisted that he would run an administration that would make this country energy dominant again. They elected, in other words, a representative of the very set of lobbyists, climate deniers, and politicians who had, in essence, been created by big energy. Or put another way, they voted for a man who pledged to bring back the dying American coal industry and was prepared to greenlight oil and natural gas pipelines of whatever sort, open the nation's coastal waters to drilling, and lift restrictions of every kind on energy companies while impeding the development of alternative sources of energy and other attempts to mitigate climate change. As the ultimate president blowback, Donald Trump promptly filled every last faintly relevant post in his administration with climate change deniers and allies of big energy, while abandoning the Paris Climate Accord. In other words, President Donald Trump has dedicated himself to nailing humanity to a cross of coal. Where's Chalmers Johnson now that we really need him? All right. Hope you all enjoyed that article. I had some very large issues with it, but you probably, maybe you know what those are. I won't go into them. I've already explained mostly what they are. Uh, Again, it's really hard to talk about what's going on when we can't, you know, when you can't discuss things that are not okay to discuss, when if you you know if the reaction of people towards an idea that they find outside the realm of acceptable discussion, the reaction is um, extreme anger or outrage. You you know you, you make it impossible to actually talk about true things or find the truth if you're trying to figure out what the truth is. If you just have decided you know what the truth is, then there's no reason to talk about it. Um, there's no reason to debate anything because whatever whatever they say on the news is obviously true, right? So you believe them. Why would they lie to you? Why would they lie to you? What could be the possible outcome of that? I wonder. But we know that the government absolutely lied and lied to us in the case of WMDs, right? Weapons of mass destruction. There were thousands and millions of people all around the world protesting this war, protesting the United States going into Iraq. Turned out to be on false pretenses, and all the left and many liberals were like, why did we do this? How could we possibly have been led down this road and into this disastrous war? Oh my God! But yet you can question that, but you can't question other things because it's just too crazy. It's just too out there. But hey, in the case of the Parkland shooting, what we absolutely do know, if we are taking if we take the mainstream media story, what we do know is that this guy was like out of control and acting insane for a really long time. He was on people's radar for a really long time, and nobody really did much to stop him. They kicked him out of school, but nobody, uh, you know, going with the story, supposedly this guy was a loose cannon and even intimated that he was going to shoot up a school, and then it just happened, right? So sounds kind of like the story that happened with 9/11, right? There was just all this chatter and all this stuff and people talking about it and the CIA and all these, that was another story that like people don't really bring up anymore. But, apparently, before the 9/11 terror attacks, there was, all this intel coming in that something was going to happen. And the Bush administration just was like, did somebody hear something? Did y'all hear that? Right? They they just straight up ignored very loud intel that there was something about to happen. And in both cases, you have to pose the question, why? Why was it ignored? Why was it so blatantly ignored? Was there a motive? Is there a reason behind that? Like, oh my God, how could you question it? How could you question this story? Oh my God. Just, anyways. If you are not allowed to question, if you are not allowed to talk about things, then surely we are in George Orwell's 1984. Surely the thought police are not only on the internet, but they're also in your head. And it becomes, then it becomes very difficult to start talking about things without people, I mean, I don't know. The fact that I can talk about this on YouTube, the fact that I can still talk about climate change on YouTube is actually pretty great. Let's hope this doesn't, this right, this freedom, or whatever it is, you want to call it. Let's hope, it continues. Last article I'm going to read is human emissions made ocean heat wave 53 times more likely. This is from National Geographic. 53 times, not 53%, 53 times. And I actually didn't know, this story even happened. 3 2016 marine heat waves that killed whales, birds, corals, and shellfish from Australia to Alaska were many times more likely thanks to climate change. I mean, I think I attributed the heat waves more to the coral bleaching events, but I didn't know that it just took out like all kinds of life in the oceans. This is by Craig Welsh from January 16th, 2018. The consequences for Alaska were stark. Dozens of whales died, as did thousands of common mirrors and tufted puffins, while sea life native to the tropics came up in nets pulled from subarctic seas. An unusual mass of warm water nicknamed the Blob, which appeared off Alaska and hung around through 2016, didn't occur in isolation. In northern Australia in 2016, high ocean heat bleached hundreds of miles of corals, killed mangroves, and destroyed giant clams. Off New Zealand, an ocean hot spell wiped out black abalone and brought an oyster-killing disease. Just as atmospheric shifts can bring droughts and nasty heat waves on land, shifts in weather or ocean circulation can also spark deadly marine heat waves, which can thoroughly scramble life at sea. But until recently, scientists understood little about what role climate change might play in these extreme sea events. Now, new first-of-its-kind research is making clear that human emissions of greenhouse gases made the appearance of each patch of hot water many times, in some cases dozens, even hundreds of times more likely to occur. It seems all of the big ones in recent years have a climate change role, said Eric Oliver, an assistant professor of physical oceanography at Dalhousie University, who co-authored a pair of studies examining all three events. The latest was published this month in the Bulletin of American Meteorological Society. In fact, while the recent excessive ocean warmth in the Gulf of Alaska and Bering Sea sparked the longest living toxal algal bloom on record, shuffled the entire marine world, and likely helped exacerbate a streptococcal outbreak that killed hundreds of sea otters outside Homer, Alaska, scientists struggled while it was happening to say whether rising temperatures from human fossil fuel burning ultimately contributed at all. This is just, this is just normal, just random. But in reviewing Oliver's research, they called his new assessment a solid piece of work. Rising tide of ocean heat waves. Much as researchers often struggle to say just how much climate change drives any individual hurricane or dry spell, Oliver knew his colleagues faced a similar problem with the suddenly widespread ocean heat waves. At the same time, the events were breaking all kinds of records. The Tasman Sea heat wave was the longest and most intense ocean warm period for that region since 1900. The Northern Australian ocean hot spell caused the most catastrophic and extensive damage to the northern Great Barrier Reef ever measured, and the Alaska event, which saw sea surface temperatures rise more than 4 degrees Fahrenheit across thousands of square miles of ocean, was entirely new. Chele Gentleman, a Seattle-based physical geographer, told National Geographic last year, "There's just nothing like it in our historical record," she says. Or maybe her name is Shell. I don't know. I'm destroying her name. I'm sorry. "There's just nothing like it in our historical record," she says. The deadly Alaskan heat wave was also the subject of a September 2016 National Geographic magazine story. But just like on land, ocean temperatures swing naturally over months or years as part of the globe's normal variability. The atmosphere gets a lot of attention when we talk about global warming, Oliver says, but something like 93% of the heat with climate change is stored in the ocean, so it's not unexpected that we might see increases in ocean heat waves. But how much did a warming planet contribute in these three cases? To find out, Oliver and his colleagues used an assortment of temperature records and climate models to explore how possible these events would have been in a world without greenhouse gases, and how that compared to what we saw in 2016. The results were striking. Off Alaska, where sea temperatures tend to vary more widely than they do closer to the equator, it was 7 times more likely that an ocean heat wave would last a year and be so intense as a result of climate change. In northern Australia, the findings were even more dramatic. Scientists projected that climate change made it 53 times more likely that an event would last as long as that one did, 224 days. But it was the 8-month heat wave in the Tasman Sea, a region where previous warm spells usually lasted only 60 to 90 days, that saw the greatest shift. Scientists found that climate change made a hot spell lasting that long 333 times more likely than it would have been without human greenhouse gas emissions. That's pretty incredible. That event was associated with shifts in westerly winds in the interior South Pacific that slightly altered ocean currents, bringing more warm water. And it's been argued that these changes are consistent with climate change, says one of Oliver's co-authors, Neil Holbrook, with the University of Tasmania. The two scientists most familiar with Alaska's blob say the work done by Oliver's team makes sense. By using climate models to compare more natural conditions to today's, you find human-caused global warming has substantially increased the risk of seeing large marine heat waves, says Nate Mantua, a landscape ecologist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in California. I think it really is that simple, at least from the global climate modeling perspective. In fact, Nick Bond, a University of Washington climatologist who gave the blob its name, has been using models to try and see how such ocean heat waves might change in coming years. So far, the news isn't great. We are finding that events like the recent Alaskan marine heat wave crop up a lot more in future decades in climate model simulations, Bond says. Why would they not? And importantly, the more intense ones are way beyond the 2014 to 2016 event. Not good. Not good. Not good news. That is all I have for tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. As always, I appreciate your comments and your participation on this channel. Again, this is the last video I'm going to link on both channels. So after today, my next video will only appear on the Black Bear News channel. So please go to Black Bear News and subscribe to that channel. The link is below in the description box. I hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until then, peace.